This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. And for an extra 10% off, use the code CFSPJ10 at checkout. Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast, I'll be looking over the game against Chelsea by bringing you a match review player rankings of our man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Andros Townsend, James Tompkins and Ray Lewington after the game. So let's begin. Alvaro Morata netted twice as Chelsea beat Palace 3-1 at Stamford Bridge to claim all the points in the second of three successive London derbies for the Eagles. The Spanish striker's 31st minute opener handed the Blues the half-time advantage, but Roy Hodgson's team brought themselves level again not long into the second half when Andros Townsend netted after a well-worked move. However, parity would just last 12 minutes as Morata completed his brace, and soon after Pedro added a third to seal the win and continue the host's unbeaten start to the Premier League campaign. There was little goalmouth scramble action until the 19th minute as Palace began well and nullified all of Chelsea's threats, and they even carved out their own opportunity on a swift counter-attack that saw James McArthur pick out Wilfried Zaha, who cut the ball back to the D where Max Meyer was lurking. However, the German bent the ball over the crossbar. But the bright start ended just after the half-an-hour mark when the hosts got themselves in front. Cesar Azpilicueta slipped the ball into Pedro's path, who had two bites of the cherry to pick out Morata. And when the ball did arrive at his feet, the informed striker swiveled to shoot low and beat Wayne Hennessy from close range. It possibly should have been 2-0 3 minutes later when Pedro saw a blocked shot spin towards Willian, who smashed the ball into the net but was denied by the linesman's flag, with replay suggesting that he was level with the Eagles' defence. But the Blues continued to probe and Morata went close to adding to his tally when a free kick was nodded into his path by Michael Alonso, but he couldn't keep his header down. The half-time whistle came at a good time for Hodgson's team as Chelsea were beginning to move through the gears, and after 15 minutes to compose themselves at the back, Palace came out positively for the second half and were rewarded on 51 minutes. James Tompkins played an incisive ball into Townsend, who laid it off to McArthur, and then he raced forward. The run was spotted by the Scotsman, who put the ball into space for Townsend to chase, and after leaving David Luiz in the wake, he produced an accurate composed finish into the bottom corner to level things up. There was a slight chance for Palace to take the lead soon after when Meyer shot straight at Kepa from a very tight angle. But just after the hour mark, the Eagles were indebted to Wayne Hennessy after he made a flying save to prevent Luiz's header from the free kick nestling into the top corner. However, he would be beaten on 65 minutes when the hosts regained the lead. Moments after entering the fray as a substitute, Eden Hazard sent a free kick into the box and it was allowed to travel right through to the back post where Morata was left unmarked, and he fired into the net to score his fifth goal in his last 5 Chelsea outings. And then the game slipped out of Palace's reach when Maurizio Sarri's team added a third with 20 minutes to play. Hazard found Alonso, who edged up the left touchline and was allowed to send a low centre towards the penalty spot, and Pedro was on hand to last a chance past Hennessy and pretty much ensure the points would go to the West Londoners. There were a few opportunities for either side after that, and the only opportunities the Eagles had to reduce the deficit came when Patrick Van Aanholt blasted well over against his former club, and in stoppage time Townsend saw a shot deflect wide. Morata should have completed his hat-trick when Chelsea broke from the resulting corner, and Hazard unselfishly teed up the Spaniard, who cheekily tried to flip the ball over Hennessy, but the Palace stopper wouldn't be caught out and prevented the scoreline flattering the hosts more than it already did. There may have been positives in the performance of Crystal Palace, but it was still a fourth defeat in their last 5 games as the Eagles lost out against Chelsea on Sunday. The Eagles lost 3-1 at Stamford Bridge, with a brace from Morata and a strike from Pedro, helping Maurizio Sarri's team continue their unbeaten start to the new Premier League season, despite Andros Townsend's equaliser early into the second half. But there are plenty of talking points arising from the game. Here are some of them. The change in formation and the effect on Palace's attack. Palace started the game brightly at Stamford Bridge, with wingers Wilfried Zaha and Andros Townsend causing problems for the Chelsea defenders as they once again played as forwards in a 4-4-2 formation, having done so well in those positions last season. But while Palace got into some promising positions in the early stages of the game, they were unable to make the most of them, and Roy Hodgson admitted afterwards that the Eagles lacked clinical finishing. And that was typified in the 14th minute when Patrick Van Aanholt burst forward from left back after intercepting a pass from Ross Barkley. He was played in by Wilfried Zaha down the left channel, but when he attempted to find a teammate in the middle, there was no one there. Zaha and Townsend were the furthest forward, but without a focal point of a recognised striker in the box, there was no one in position to seek out. Zaha's frustration. Last season it worked well for Palace, with Zaha playing up front alongside Townsend, but Zaha often ploughed the lone furrow up top for large periods of the game, as Townsend dropped deeper to try and help out his team defensively, looking to get on the ball and disrupt Jorginho in Chelsea's midfield. Zaha himself came deeper at times, but he cut a frustrated figure at times as his threat was nullified, with Palace not getting the best out of their talisman on this occasion. Townsend's barren spell ends. In the build-up to the game, Andros Townsend spoke about the challenge of scoring more goals for Crystal Palace, and he managed to add to his tally of 7 goals for Palace as he produced a crisp finish to get the Eagles back on level terms early in the second half. It was a fine finish from the former Spurs and Newcastle man, and ended a run of 20 Premier League matches without a goal and 31 shots without scoring in the top flight, the longest such run of any player who's failed to meet the net in that period. 100 not out for Hennessy. The defeat at Stamford Bridge was Wayne Hennessy's 100th Premier League appearance for Crystal Palace. Sadly, he could not mark the occasion with a victory, although he made a couple of fine saves early on in the second half. West London has been the location of 2 of the Welshmen's best performances in the Palace shirt in the Premier League, at Stamford Bridge in 2017 and at Craven Cottage on the opening day of the season. And although this was not necessarily a game to remember for Hennessy, he has firmly established himself as Palace's #1 goalkeeper this season, and will now be looking to add to his tally of 100 Premier League appearances for the club. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place to join in with discussions and also share your opinions with other fans. And if you are someone like myself who likes to go onto forums, not only to read what other guys are saying, but also to post your own opinion, then of course I would also highly recommend you do join the Facebook group. And obviously, if you are someone, once again, like myself, who likes to keep up to date with all things Palace, all the latest news, whether that be interviews, transfers, or just sort of our views as a page about anything that's going on about Palace, then of course do follow us on both our Twitter and Facebook pages at Crystal Palace. Now, if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, obviously that's another great place for you to share your opinion. So if you are listening here on YouTube, then of course feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, with obviously 10 being the best. And even if you are a Chelsea fan, or even if you're a Palace fan and you don't want to do your player ratings, then of course just feel free to comment below with just your general views of the game. Now, the main reason I want you to do this is just that rather than you just coming here listening to my opinion, I want you guys to comment in the comment section what you thought about the game, and basically so I can come back, I can read it and basically see how your opinion of the game compares to mine. But also, if you do post any questions, I'm obviously always open to answering any questions you have. So if you do want to ask me a question or just drop below your general views of the game, then of course you can feel free to do that. And alongside myself coming back to look at it, I'm sure any other fans who come to the video, whether they be Palace or Chelsea fans, rather than them just listening to my views in the podcast, they can also read the comment section just to get sort of a more general view of what the fans thought, not necessarily just what I thought and how I rated the players' performances, but actually they can read the comment section and just get sort of a more broader view of how the fans as a whole thought the game did went. And considering we played quite well in some parts of the game and quite bad in others, is obviously there's going to be quite a lot for discussion this week. Now, if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've mentioned or join the Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, and we're going to start in goal with Wayne Hennessy, who actually I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now, in terms of Hennessy's performance here, I've talked about it in the last few weeks and the fact that he's been fairly consistent this season. And actually, as you can see, the fact that I've given him a 6, it was a fairly sort of consistent performance once again. Now, obviously, early on in the game, I thought Palace started the game quite brightly and we were playing quite well in the early stages. And that basically meant that Hennessy wasn't really tested, mainly because we were the better side in the first sort of 20 minutes or so. So basically, Chelsea didn't have any chances for on goal. So early on in the game, Hennessy wasn't really tested, and that's mainly because we were playing well, but also because Chelsea hadn't quite got into the game and they were just sort of failed to get into some sort of rhythm. But obviously, you know, the opening goal from close range, you know, early on in the first half, didn't really have much to do. And then when we concede the goal, I don't really think there's too much more he could do there. You know, it's literally right in front of him, about 4 or 5 yards in front of him. And obviously, Tompkins should have really, you know, cleared that cross better. So arguably, in that first half, not really too much to blame Hennessy for, mainly because he wasn't really tested. And mainly because the goal we did concede, I can't really fault him for that. Mainly because it was so close to him, but also because the defence really should have been doing better. Whether that's the fact that they should have closed down Morata so he couldn't get onto the ball the second time round, or whether it's the fact that Tompkins should have cleared the ball better the first time round. Whatever way you look at it, I don't really think there's any blame there on Hennessy. Now, coming into the second half, I thought he done superbly there. Now, obviously, some of these saves, people would say, oh, they're routine saves, you would expect keepers to make it. But when you've got the quality players, you know, people like Morata, like David Luiz, who are putting balls into the box and getting their heads on them, it can sometimes be quite difficult to do to make safe from it. So the fact that Hennessy made a couple of very good saves early on in that second half to still, you know, give us a chance to at least get back into the game, that was great to see as well. And you know, that's the point I really want to highlight, in the fact that yes, we went on to lose the game, so it doesn't really matter anyway, but the fact that he made these fine saves early on in that second half kept us in it up until that point. And then when we did get the equaliser, it goes to show how important it could have been in the fact that he made these goals. Now, obviously, you could feel we could have probably done better with Morata's second goal. The fact that Morata, you know, well, I suppose a great delivery by Hazard. Well, not the greatest delivery, but a delivery nonetheless from Hazard into the box. And obviously, Morata's there at the far post. Arguably, you could say Hennessy's positioning should have been better. So, rather than him being dragged to that far post, maybe he should have stayed a little bit more central, so he could be able to actually dive down to his left and maybe get a save, you know, at least get a hand on that goal. But also, you could say that actually the defence also should have been doing better there. So, although we could criticise Hennessy for that and the fact that he probably should have done better with Morata's second goal, I think you've got to look back at it and go, both the first 2 goals in particular that we conceded, they're definitely, the defence is more at fault than the goalkeeper. Now, in terms of the third goal, I don't really think he had little chance with that, you know. Obviously, we shouldn't be letting, I think it was Alonso, get to the byline. You know, Wan-Bissaka should have been doing a better job there, stopping that cross coming in. And arguably, it was a great finish by Pedro into the far corner. And because because of all the men in the box, Hennessy was at the opposite post, so it's quite difficult for him to dive. So arguably, obviously it was a great finish by Pedro nonetheless, but I don't really think he had any chance with it anyway because of his sort of starting position. But overall, I do think a 6 overall is a very fair sort of reflection of Hennessy's game, and I do think if we had finished the game 1-1 as we thought it would do, and if we hadn't made these silly defensive mistakes to give the goals away, you'll probably be looking at Hennessy maybe a 7 for his for the game, mainly because of them important saves he made quite early on in the second half. But the fact that he went on to concede them 2 goals later on in the game, I really do think that sort of weighs him down to a 6. But nonetheless, a very good performance from him. And like I keep saying week in, week out, it's very nice to see him now consistently performing in the league. So I'm going to move on now to our first player in defence, and that is the right back Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Now this guy's been quite, you know, outstanding this season and week in, week out. You know, much like what I've said with Hennessy, he's been one of our most outstanding players this season. But this game here against Chelsea, whether it's the fact that he was still a bit tired and a bit sort of lethargic from the midweek game, whatever it was, he wasn't really playing that great here, and for that reason I'm going to give him a 5 overall. Now, much like what I said with Hennessy, and the fact that in the early stages of the game, you know, Palace were playing quite well, I do think one of the main reasons for that is because Aaron Wan-Bissaka, in the sort of first half, was on top form. You know, he made a number of vital tackles and interceptions quite early on in the game. So in that respect, you could say that one of the reasons we played so well early on in the game is basically the fact that Aaron Wan-Bissaka was one of the players who was frustrating Chelsea and basically, you know, making sure that they couldn't sort of get things going and getting into the game. But obviously, when you look back at the opening goal, so although Wan-Bissaka started the game really well, as did the whole Palace team, actually probably should have done better for Morata's goal, you know, the opening goal he scored. You could look at it and go, maybe he should have been tighter to him. And like I've said already, you know, I think that first goal, there's 2 issues there. Obviously, the clearance by Tompkins wasn't good enough, and obviously, whether it was Wan-Bissaka or Saka or even Tompkins getting up off the ground again, they should have been marking Morata much more closely. And even when that second ball came into the box, we should have just been on him straight away and making it as difficult as possible for Morata to score. But because no one closed Morata down, it was a very easy tap-in for him on the spin. So arguably, you've got to look at it and go, actually, Wan-Bissaka, even though he started the game so brightly, the fact that he lost his man Morata in the box for that first goal was obviously a bit disappointing. Now, I suppose one thing I've talked about quite a lot this season is the fact that in order to get better and get to that next level, Wan-Bissaka just needs to try and get forward a bit more. And certainly that's what we saw towards the end of the game. Obviously, by this point, we're 3-1 down. So, of course, you're going to understand the whole team putting pressure on in terms of an offensive play. But the fact that Wan-Bissaka did try and get forward early on, I suppose that's some sort of positive from the game. But like I've said already, it wasn't really one of his best games for Palace. And, you know, when you look back at the last few games or so where he set such high standards, obviously you can understand him with his inexperience and the fact that sometimes you're going to have bad games here and there. You can understand him why he had a slight off game here, but I do think the main sort of contribution to that is the fact that he did play midweek, played the whole game there, whilst also playing against Arsenal the weekend before last. So the fact that he'd been playing loads of games, arguably you're going to get tired at some point, and certainly that did sort of reflect it in his play. But like I said, Wan-Bissaka here, probably at fault for not closing down Morata for the first goal, but nevertheless, a few good tackles and vital interceptions here and there, but certainly not one of his best games for Palace. So I'm going to move on now to the centre-back James Tompkins, who, much like Wan-Bissaka, even though he's been playing great recently, it was a pretty disappointing performance by his standards, and for that reason I'm going to give him a 5 overall. Now, in terms of just a moment in the game where I suppose it was a heart-in-mouth moment with involving James Tompkins, is where a ball came into the box, or a cross came into the box, and he absolutely sliced it, and it almost went in for an own goal quite early on. So what I've already mentioned in terms of us playing so well in the first half was mainly because the fact that whenever the ball got put in the box by Chelsea, we were clearing our lines, and arguably that's an alright tactic, you know, sitting deep, absorbing pressure, and then obviously defending well whilst also countering well as well. So that did work for us in the first half, but there was obviously one chance where one moment where obviously that tactic didn't quite work because Tompkins gone to clear his lines, gone to slice the ball up the field, and he's almost gone in for an own goal. So I suppose you could go, actually, you know, that was a bit worrying moment. But the fact that he made some other important interceptions at the back in the first half as well obviously contributed to us playing quite well in that first half. And I suppose you could say it was sort of a half, not a game of two halves, but a half of two halves, in the fact that he started the game really, really well, you know, making important interceptions, you know, just stopping every Chelsea attack and basically frustrating Chelsea because they couldn't get into the box. But like I've said, it was moments like this where, yes, every other ball was fine when he cleared it, but when he cleared it and it almost went in for an own goal, that was obviously a bit worrying. And, you know, you could say that actually, even though he done relatively well, other than the goals we conceded in terms of his defensive play, actually you've got to look at it and go, maybe that's one of the reasons, you know, he got a 5 in the fact that, you know, he obviously sliced that cross really badly. Now, obviously, like I've said already, you know, the first goal, I've already talked about Wan-Bissaka and the fact that he probably should have been closing his man down quicker. And actually, I think James Tompkins equally has got as much blame for this goal as the other. Now, obviously, like I've said already, Pedro put a ball into the box and Tompkins headed clear. But rather than heading it out, he's obviously headed it back to Pedro, which basically made it easier for Pedro just to cross it back into the box again. And obviously for Morata to go forth and score. So, like I've said already, obviously that header and Wan-Bissaka's marking obviously contributed to that goal. But I do think James Tompkins, 9 times out of 10, he normally clears that ball really well. But maybe he was just having an off game here, where as opposed to sort of, you know, heading it sort of outside of the penalty box, he's obviously headed it, you know, out towards the byline. And obviously that's not great because you've got people, I think someone like Alonso might have been on that side, or, you know, someone was on that side, and then obviously Pedro was as well. So rather than heading it right at the defender who's right next to you on your left hand side, just head it and clear it up the field. But obviously for us, Tompkins misguided his header, put it back to Pedro, who of course at this point Tompkins was on his feet because it was a diving clearance. So basically he's made it very easy for the ball to come into the box because there was no way Tompkins would intercept it. And of course, you know, Morata was able to score. Now, to be honest, like I said with Wan-Bissaka, he has actually played much better this season, and obviously that's quite obvious. And you can understand he was quite frustrated with himself, you know, considering the fact that he's played relatively well recently, and then he has a bad performance like this, where even though Palace played really well for periods of the game, the fact that a few silly, sloppy defensive mistakes meant that we lost the game. Obviously, you can understand the team being disappointed, but actually someone like Tompkins in particular, who was obviously at fault for the first goal, you can understand him being disappointed. Now, in terms of the second goal as well, I do think there's got to be a bit of blame as well, not just on Tompkins, but the back line as a whole, in terms of a bit too narrow, a bit too deep on that set piece. And obviously the fact that we let Morata free at that far post is obviously an issue as well. We should have been marking him, knowing that he's so good at headering. We should have had someone marking him there, or even if we hadn't had someone marking him, at least someone on that near post, obviously to stop the ball going there, because like I've said already, Hennessy's positioning was that he was positioned more on the right hand side. So obviously when Morata's gone to far right and into the left hand side, obviously there was no one there. So James Tompkins overall, I do think a 5 is a fair reflection of his performance, considering it was quite a disappointing game by his standards. Obviously the first goal, he's obviously at fault, much like Wan-Bissaka, in the fact that he obviously didn't clear his lines properly. Rather than heading the ball clear outside the box, he obviously headed it back to Pedro. And of course the second goal as well, obviously the whole defence was at fault there, but I do think he could have done better with the shape in terms of the shape of the back four, but also he could have done better, even though it may not have been his player to mark, it would have been better to mark Morata, making sure that he couldn't get that second goal. But overall, disappointing performance from James Tompkins, but I do think a 5 is a fair reflection. So I'm going to move on now to his centre-back partner, Mamadou Sakho, who I'm also going to give a 5 overall. Now obviously, like I've said already, I do think for large periods of the game, especially in that sort of first 20 minutes or so, I did actually think Palace played really well, and Mamadou Sakho was one of these players who started the game really well, and you're looking at the game, well, especially in that first sort of 20 minutes or so, thinking, actually, because we're doing so well at restricting Chelsea, maybe we might be able to get something from this game. Now obviously Sakho, towards the end of the game, and obviously the goals we conceded, you could look at him and go, he was at fault for that, but I just want to put it out there, I suppose for the whole defence as well, that although it was pretty poor defensively in terms of our defending from set pieces, and the fact that we conceded the 3 goals from defensive mistakes, obviously that's disappointing. But I've got to say, you know, if I had to pick out one, I don't want to be ultra critical, but if I had to pick out one positive, it'd be the fact that they started the game really well. It's just these little lapses of concentration and mistakes which obviously cost us. Now obviously we're looking back at the second goal, so we've obviously talked quite a lot about the first goal already, but obviously Eden Hazard, as soon as he comes on, he wins a free kick on the edge of the area, and Mamadou Sakho is in the wall, and rather than, you know, trying to head Hazard's free kick clear, he obviously ducks out of the way of it, and obviously because of that, it's obviously found its way to Morata to score. So I suppose you could look at it and go, Tompkins was at fault, and Wan-Bissaka for the first goal, for A, not closing the man down, and B, not obviously putting in a good enough header to get the ball away. And then obviously the second goal, obviously the marking wasn't great, so that's the first point. But obviously the second point is the fact that Sakho ducked out of the way of the ball, rather than just, you know, heading it, getting the ball out of the area. He ducked out of the way of it, and obviously that made its way through to Morata to score the goal really easily. Now, like I've said already, I do think he started the game relatively well, but obviously, you know, all good things, you know, they don't always come to a good end. So although he started the game really well, I do think towards the end of the game, quite a lot of misplaced passes here and there, and the fact that he, you know, maybe it's just because of the quality of Chelsea, let's say, but the fact that he struggled towards the end of the game, maybe it's the fact that he was a little bit tired, and the fact that, you know, because Chelsea had that little bit more quality, they were starting to put more pressure on us. Whatever it was, it did seem to affect his play as the game went on. But like I said, I want to really highlight this for the whole defence. I do think we started the game relatively well, and we defended well for parts in the game. I just think that, you know, Sakho in particular, the fact that he made a few misplaced passes with trying to sort of overplay it at the back, whilst also just not being sort of the rock that he normally has been, that was really sort of what sort of contributed to his overall disappointing performance. But Mamadou Sakho here, I do think a 5 is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to our final player in our back four, and that is of course the left back Patrick Vannano, who I'm actually going to give a 5 overall for his performance. Now before I go on to talk about his performance, you know, you can see sort of a common theme with our back four here, in the fact that they've all got 5s overall for their performances. But like I said with Mamadou Sakho, you know, for spells of the game they were playing relatively well, especially the sort of first 20 minutes or so. But obviously with the goals we conceded, and obviously the fact that towards the end of the game we sort of tailed off, that obviously contributed to the you know, basically the defensive team sort of going down in performance. But I just want to highlight that point once again, because I do think Vannano was one of these players who started the game relatively well, but much like the whole defence sort of dropped off towards the end of the game. Now obviously, as he always does, you know, he was always looking to go forward from left back, and that's something I've said recently that he hadn't been doing necessarily well. You know, you look back at the Wolves game, I think it was, and I did criticise him, saying actually, whilst he done his defensive work really good, he actually was not going forward as much as he had done previously. So it was nice to see that in this game here against Chelsea at the weekend, albeit harder opposition, the fact that he actually looked to get a little bit more further forward than he has done in previous weeks was obviously great to see. And it's nice to see that actually I've been calling out for this, in the fact that he's very good going forward, so actually he needs to obviously get his defensive work right, which is perfectly fine, I get that, you know, that comes first, but he's so good going forward that actually you need to get the mix right between attack and defence. And I do think in this game here, it wasn't necessarily perfect, but I do think it was better than it has been in previous weeks. Now, he's one, people have often said that he's one of our best finishers at the club, and if you look back at the goals he scored last season during pre-season, he certainly has got that talent on both feet to actually, pass and shoot. So obviously, in this game here, when he was going forward, you'd expect him to at least have a few chances, whether that be put across into the box or have a shot for himself. But he just lacked that final quality with that final pass or shot on the occasion. And overall, even though, Chelsea were peppering us towards the end of the game, I do think he had a tough afternoon. But like I've said, in form Chelsea, they're playing so well. They're unbeaten at the beginning of the season. So arguably, we came into this game not expecting anything. So when we didn't really get anything from the game, whilst we also put in a competent performance for periods of the game, must highlight that word periods, the fact that we've done that was obviously good to see. But like I've said already, overall it wasn't the greatest performance, and I do think Van Aanholt was one of these players who should have probably done better than he done on the day. But like I've said already, I do think a 5 is sort of a fair reflection. I think defensively, especially for that final goal, especially for Pedro's goal, obviously Van Aanholt was the man who was meant to be marking him. So although I've obviously criticised Wan-Bissaka for actually letting Alonso get to the byline and put the cross in the first place, you've also got to look at Patrick Van Aanholt and go, actually he should have been marking Pedro a lot better. And if you look back at the replays, you can see that Van Aanholt can see Pedro, but rather than tracking his run, obviously, Van Aanholt's just ball watching, and by the time the ball's come into the box, he's tried to run and try and intercept it off Pedro, but obviously it was too late. So in terms of the goals, you're looking at the first goal, Tompkins and Wan-Bissaka's fault. The second goal, obviously you're looking maybe Tompkins' fault and maybe Sakho's fault for obviously ducking out the way. And obviously the third goal as well, you're looking at Wan-Bissaka for letting the ball into the box, and obviously Van Aanholt for actually losing the run and actually losing his man in Pedro. But like I've said already, the good parts of Van Aanholt's performance is the fact that he looked to get forward as much as possible, but obviously the bad side is that when he did go forward, he just lacked that final quality, and the fact that he had quite a tough afternoon, and that sort of showed up really quite clearly in the fact that, the way we conceded our third goal, in the fact that he obviously let his man get past him too freely. But Patrick Van Aanholt here, I do think a 5 is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to the midfield, and I'm going to start with the captain Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 6 overall for his performance. Now obviously before I go on to talk about his performance individually, obviously we changed up the formation in midfield. So rather than in the last few games where we've been playing a 4-4-2 with two sort of defensive midfielders essentially with wingers and obviously your forwards, rather than doing that, we packed out the midfield with a midfield 4, Milivojevic, Kouyaté, McArthur and Maya, and obviously we just had 2 players up front in Zaha and Townsend. So that sort of change in formation did seem to help us. You look back at the Arsenal game and it seemed to help us. The fact that we played 3 in midfield, that obviously gave us a bit more, it was basically made us a bit more compact, and obviously meant that we could not be overrun by the opposition. So obviously the change in midfield and the shape was obviously great, and obviously that sort of, I suppose, contributed to us playing the way we did at certain periods of the game. When we were playing well, the midfield was quite crucial to it, in the fact that making sure we didn't get overrun. But I do think also you've got to look at some players like Milivojevic, who hasn't necessarily been the best recently, other than scoring 2 penalties against Arsenal. So the fact that players like him stepped up, albeit they weren't great in the game, but the fact that they've stepped up compared to previous performances this season was of course great to see. Now in terms of Luka's performance, I thought he made quite a number of good challenges in the midfield, but he didn't really have too much influence on the game. Now what I mean by that is the fact that yes, you can make a crunching tackle and you can win the ball back, that's great. But the fact that you don't really have that much influence, the fact that that tackle doesn't really change the game or doesn't really start up anything, that's really the thing that was quite disappointing. But like I've said already, Luka, other than scoring 2 penalties and last week and obviously playing really well in midweek, he hasn't really had the best of seasons. So obviously by his standards, this was obviously an improvement. But like I've said already, when you make such good challenges in the midfield, you obviously want to try and influence the game by putting balls forward or, winning the ball back and being that box-to-box midfielder. We didn't quite see that in his game, but like I've said, the fact that he was starting to make more challenges is obviously an improvement. Now obviously another negative from his performance is the fact that he got booked, and that was for a foul on Cesc Fabregas. So once again, some could argue it's taken one for the team, but I do think he was quite lucky in the game that he got booked for that one. But there were 2 or 3 other fouls before that he probably could have been booked for, and arguably, if he had been booked, he for sure would have been sent off for that niggly foul on Fabregas, so you could consider himself lucky there. But once again, sometimes you have to take one for the team. He got booked for that. But I do think, quite late on in the game, great ball through to Morata, and obviously Milivojevic made that important interception to flick it over to Hennessy so that Hennessy could catch the ball and obviously, play it out from the back again. So even though he wasn't the greatest in the game, in the fact that he obviously gave away a few silly fouls, whilst, sort of combining that with a few good challenges, but once again, good challenges combined with, bookable challenges isn't the greatest combination. And like I've said, he didn't really have too much influence in the game, but the fact that he made important interceptions, like that one on Morata, to stop him going forth, and I think it would have been his hat-trick scored his hat-trick, that was of course great to see as well. Now obviously, like I've said already, I don't think he influenced the game too much, but I suppose the one thing that's quite positive about his performance is the fact that he was always looking to get the team further forward, always trying to play that pass forward. And I think, especially quite early on in the game, first 20 minutes or so, I do think he was quite important in terms of getting the ball in the midfield and spraying it forward. Now obviously he didn't have too much influence in the game in that respect, that most of his passes didn't really come to anything, but the fact that he was looking to play the team slightly further up the pitch was of course great to see. But overall, I do think a 6 is a fair reflection. I don't think he was fairly terrible in the game, and certainly by the fact that he made a few important challenges, especially that one against Morata, was obviously great to see. But giving away and getting booked for niggly fouls whilst also not having as much influence in the game as you would like as the captain, it was a bit disappointing. But like I said, I do think sort of a 6 is a fair reflection of his performance. So I'm going to move on now to one of his midfield partners in Cheku Kouyaté, who I'm also going to give a 6 overall. Now, personally for me, I think this guy was absolutely brilliant in the first half, especially that first 20 minutes or so. And I certainly do think his stamina, his strength, certainly helped us to sort of counter Chelsea's quality, like I've said, especially in that first 20 minutes or so. Now, I do think in the middle of the park, playing alongside Luka, I thought he'd done a relatively good job, breaking up play and actually, getting the ball forward to obviously support the forwards whenever possible. But, he's sort of, unlike in previous games where I thought he played that box-to-box midfielder role really good, in the fact that he could play both defensive, both attacking roles. In this game here, he wasn't necessarily the greatest going forward, and he didn't really influence that. He didn't really use his pace or his power to drive us forward. But the fact that Chelsea, I suppose, have that quality, you can't always play that way. So the fact that he couldn't go slightly further forward, but the fact that he actually had to stay back, break up play, and actually just spread the ball to the forwards, that was of course great to see as well. Now really for me, there isn't really much of note to talk about Kouyaté, because I do think, he'd done what he had to do, break up play in midfield. That was his job, he'd done exactly that. And I do think, especially in that first 20 minutes or so, he was quite important to us, not necessarily being absolutely great in that first half, but he was quite important in the fact that he broke up play and basically made it difficult for Chelsea. If I had to pick out one player in particular who made it quite difficult and was one of the reasons that Chelsea had to change their style at halftime and had to bring on Hazard to get back into the game, you certainly look at someone like Kouyaté in the fact that he frustrated Chelsea, and you could argue that he was probably one of the reasons why Chelsea had to change up like they did, mainly because he was doing quite well. And I talked last week about the job that him and Luka were doing in front of the back four. Once again here, when you've got the quality opposition like Chelsea, you've obviously got to do a little bit more defensively just to sort of basically stop the quality of Chelsea getting through, and I do think Kouyaté and Luka done a relatively good job at that. And as I sort of said with the goals we conceded were mainly defensive errors, so you can't really fault Kouyaté and Luka, and even someone like McArthur and Meyer to that extent. You can't really blame them for the goals we conceded, because they done their job protecting the back four. It was just the back four making errors after that. But overall, Cheku Kouyaté, not the best, not the worst performance, a 6 overall. So I'm going to move on now to James McArthur, who I'm also going to give a 6 for his performance. Now this is a player who, he's been up for quite a lot of debate recently. He hasn't necessarily been the greatest recently, so you can understand why people were calling for him to be dropped, or just basically, asking him basically just to up his game, because he's been a very good servant for the club and he's been playing relatively well, last season, and obviously this season he hasn't necessarily been playing to that standard. So the fact that he was able to pick himself up from previous performances, last few weeks or so, and play, to not the best standard we know by his standards he set, but the fact that he was able to play at a more sort of average level than he has done previously was of course great to see as well. Now, the reason I've given him a 6 is that for the large part of the game, I don't think it was necessarily his best game, and he obviously struggled to get on the ball, but the fact that he was actually forced to play more defensively and he actually gave a very good defensive outlet is one of the reasons I've given him a 6 overall. Now, I talked about Luka and Chiarte providing that cover, and yes, that was true, but MacArthur playing slightly further wide, obviously, you know, linking up with Wan-Bissaka on that side, or when he was playing on the left, linking up with Patrick Van Aanholt. So whenever he was playing wide, I do think for large periods of it, he obviously struggled to get on the ball, but the fact that he was forced to play more defensive and still gave that defensive outlet was of course good as well. Now, one of the main reasons I've given him a 6 is the fact that he got the assist for Townsend's goal. Now, that was a notable impact, because if you got someone like MacArthur who struggled to get on the ball, wasn't really doing too much in the game, but then when he does get on the ball and he provides a quality 1-2 and a quality assist with that through ball to Townsend, that is of course what you expect from some players. Now, that's something I've mentioned quite a lot with Wilfried Zaha this season, in the fact that sometimes Zaha can have an absolutely terrible game, but his quality shows in the fact that he can just pull something out of nothing, and that was sort of the case here with MacArthur. You know, I'm not saying he's on the same level as Zaha, but the fact that he was playing fairly average throughout the game and struggling to get on the ball, but when he did get on the ball, he provided that little bit of quality to obviously get us through, get us in between at Chelsea defence, and obviously, you know, put Townsend through to score the great goal, which I'll go on to talk about. So, although MacArthur was quiet for large parts of the game, the fact that he showed up when it mattered to provide that quality 1-2 and that pass to Townsend, which I must say was perfectly weighted as well, that was of course great to see. But I do think James MacArthur, I do think a 6 is a fair result. So now I'm going to move on to the final player in our midfield, and that is of course Max Meyer, who I'm also going to give a 6 overall for his performance. Now, before going to talk about his performance, you know, I've just got to highlight the fact that I've given all of our midfield 4 6s overall, which once again just goes to show, I suppose, a consistency in our performance across midfield, but also I suppose you could say actually the fact that they worked as a unit and actually as sort of a team within the team, you sort of I suppose a pod, you say, like the midfield as a pod. The fact that they played well collectively obviously goes to show that actually as a partnership they've done relatively well. Now, in terms of Max Meyer as a whole, you know, this was obviously his second Premier League start for Palace, and you know, people have been calling out for weeks, including myself, for him to start the game because when he's come off the bench, he's shown his quality, and of course, even though the League Cup isn't the greatest competition, he's absolutely excelled in that, except obviously, you know, against Middlesbrough the other week. Other than that, he's excelled in that competition, and I do think it was about time he got his chance, whether that be at least, you know, 45 minutes on the pitch, or as in this case, play for the majority of the game. So obviously it was great to see him start the game, and I personally as well do agree with what most people put on Twitter, and I think I tweeted something out like, finally the lineup we've been calling for, and basically that was a midfield 4 with Meyer, Chiarte, Luka and MacArthur. So we've been saying for ages, you know, we keep getting overrun in midfield, literally pack out the midfield, and that's what we want. And obviously we want the sort of experience of MacArthur and the captaincy skills, let's say, of Luka, and we wanted the quality of Meyer and Chiarte in the team. So the fact that we've combined that in a midfield 4 was great to see, and actually it did show in periods here, albeit not great throughout the whole game, but it did show in periods here that actually as a partnership in midfield it could work, but also it gives us a little bit more balance. And obviously Meyer was playing in midfield 4, but he primarily was playing on the left hand side, slightly further wide, much like what MacArthur was doing on that right hand side, and actually cutting in from that left hand side. I do think he had a couple of shooting opportunities in that first half, but obviously, much like what's been the theme of Palace in the final third this season, we obviously failed to make them count. Now, one of these chances was a great ball into the box. It's come to him on the edge of the area and he fired just over, and then there was another one where he was denied by a superb block by David Luiz. So you could argue that actually, you know, him driving forward and actually cutting inside from that left hand side was quite effective. Although I do think towards the end of the game where we played him sort of more central, he was much more effective, and it goes to show that that's his sort of more effective position. But the fact that he's able to play out wide, come inside and play a number of positions whilst also having shooting opportunities was obviously great to see. And you know, when you look at who he came in the team to replace, you know, Jeffrey Slupp started the last game. When you consider Max Meyer starting instead of Jeffrey Slupp, there is sort of quite a big jump in terms of quality. So like I've said already, obviously, you know, was able to drive us forward through the midfield and was quite influential for parts of the game. But I do think, you know, the fact that he had these chances, you could say he should have done better. Obviously the first one, try and at least get it on target and, you know, make the goalkeeper make a save rather than just trying to go for the spectacular and actually, you know, putting it over. And obviously the second one, can't really do too much about that because it was a superb block from David Luiz. Now obviously in the second half he sort of, I suppose his performance levels dwindled, and he obviously got substituted because he really failed to make an impression in that second half. And I do think the perfect phrase is a game of two halves, because I think in the first half, and some people may disagree with me, but I do think he was great in the first half and probably deserves a 7 you know, for that first half performance. And that was mainly because of his passing, his link-up play with Wilfried Zaha, and obviously his overall attacking influence. Now, when I say that, I don't just mean the fact that he had 2 shots of note in the game, but I do think the fact that he's linking up with someone like Wilfried Zaha, and obviously not looking to get chances himself, but also looking to provide, that was the main reason. But the fact that he was also terrible in that second half really just talks, you know, really relates back to that game of two halves. You know, great in that first half, probably a 7 overall, and obviously terrible in the second with a 5. And that really just brings me nicely on to my sort of summary of his performance. You know, I do think he probably could have been done better at times in the game, and that's mainly because in that second half I think we could have seen a little bit more from him. But certainly in that first sort of 20 minutes or so where we were playing well, I do think he was quite crucial to that, and that was mainly because of his link-up play with Wilfried Zaha, but also the fact that he obviously had shots of his own. That was of course great to see. But I do think a 6 is a fair result. You know, when you consider I've given him sort of a 7 for that first half and a 5 for that second half performance, I do think a 6 overall, I do think is a fair reflection of his performance. So I'm going to move on now to the first of our 2 strikers, and I'm going to start with Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 7 overall for his performance. Now in terms of this partnership up front, you know, I've talked about it previously, but 4-4-2, it's worked for us in the past, and it also hasn't worked for us in the past. And there's been iterations of this 4-4-2 formation. You know, we've got one where it sort of transitions in attack to a 4-3-3. There's other ones where when we're defending, it changes to that. And obviously I've talked about this in length quite a lot, in the fact that we often, quite a lot, especially in the last few games or so, we do change positions to sort of, you know, make an impact or change the game overall. And I do think this 4-4-2, yes, it worked last season, especially against Chelsea, but I just think it wasn't quite working here, and that's mainly because Townsend and Zaha quite simply are not primarily wingers. And I do think Zaha can play possibly up front, but I do think Zaha's much better with an actual striker up front as opposed to playing that sort of unorthodox role with Townsend there. But in terms of Townsend's performance, I'm going to give him a 7 overall, because I do think actually he did cause quite a number of problems for the Chelsea defenders, and because he was playing in that more forward role, it allowed him to not only get down the middle but also get down that left hand side. And actually quite early on in the game I do think he linked really well with Patrick Van Aanholt and Max Meyer, and it just goes back to what I talked about with Max Meyer. Yes, Meyer and Zaha had that good partnership down that side as well, but I also do think in parts of the game Meyer, especially in that first half, was actually doing very nice sort of link-up play and work with Townsend down that side as well. But I do think because he was playing in a forward role, it gave him a little bit more freedom in the fact that he didn't have to stay wide. But because Townsend's not naturally a striker, obviously you can expect him to drift wide, and certainly I think that's where he caused the most problems, in the fact that he could run directly, you know, at players. And although at times he was obviously forced to play deep, and that was mainly just to sort of help out his team defensively, the fact that he was still able to cause Chelsea problems on the counter-attack was of course great to see. But I do think that actually the fact that we were put under a lot more pressure in that second half obviously meant that Townsend had to play a little bit more deeper, and that seemed to have an impact on his game, and he sort of did suffer as a result, because you'd expect a player who, you know, scored a fantastic equaliser, you'd expect that to spur him on. But because Chelsea were putting even more pressure on us, it obviously meant that he had to play more defensive and wasn't able to go forward as much as he would have, you know, like to, considering he had that confidence of the goal. And that moves me nicely onto the goal. Obviously it was a fine equaliser, just sort of 10 minutes into that second half, and of course he finished it superbly past Kepa, you know, into that far corner. And obviously, you know, like I said already, that sort of give and go, that 1-2 with McCarthy was obviously great, but the fact that Townsend was able to, you know, get past David Luiz and then obviously curl it around the keeper into the far corner, get the nice power on it, nice accuracy, that was of course great to see as well. But the main thing is just the run as well. You know, obviously it was great that he was able to find McCarthy and he was able to return the pass, but the fact that Townsend was able to, you know, directly run in between that Chelsea defence and obviously get on the end of the ball as well, that was the thing that was most impressive. But overall, Andros Townsend, I do think a 7 is a fair result, in I suppose a fair reflection of his performance. You know, he was constantly causing problems for that Chelsea defence, playing in that more forward role. And even though, you know, quite often or not he drifted out to the left, I still do think playing in that more central role, it gave him obviously that flexibility, I suppose, to attack the back four, and as we saw with the goal he scored, you know, when you allow someone like Townsend to actually run directly at the centre backs, he's obviously able to get inside, and as we saw with the goal, when you get inside, he's obviously got that ability to finish. And you know, I've said previously in the fact that he's gone from one extreme to the other, in the fact that sometimes he just shoots everywhere and the balls goes out of the stadium, and sometimes he doesn't shoot at all and, you know, often overplays it. So the fact that in this chance here, rather than skying it like he does with most of his other shots, the fact that he was able to compose himself and put it into the far corner was really quite impressive. And like I said already, it was a good goal, not just in the fact that the finish, but I do think the build up to it as well was obviously very good. So I'm going to move on now to our final player, and that is of course Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give a 6 overall for his performance. Now Zaha, you know, he's obviously well known for his skills and trickery, but that was one of, you know, Chelsea's downfalls, in the fact that actually they let Zaha's skill and trickery obviously cause them plenty of problems in the game. Now obviously, on quite a number of occasions, obviously he was using that skill and trickery to, you know, turn the defence and get into and attack them in the game. And obviously, much like what I said with Townsend, I do think Zaha, much like Townsend, was obviously very good at running directly at the defence. But the main thing, I suppose, was disappointing, and the reason I've given him a 6 as opposed to the, you know, the 7 I've given MacArthur, is just the fact, and I suppose this is not just his fault, but the fact that whenever Zaha went forward, rather than looking to get a pass, he sort of try and dribble past the players. And although it did work on a few occasions, there were other times where he was just crowded out. So I suppose decision making is the main reason he hasn't got a 7. And you know, I've said it in the past, you know, Zaha, he's got that skill to get past the player, and 9 times out of 10 that works. But that 1 time out of 10 where it doesn't work, when you get crowded out by Chelsea players, it would have been better for him just to give the pass to someone else. And there were a few opportunities and chances I can think of, you know, in the game where someone like Townsend was in space, someone like Max Meyer was in space. So rather than Zaha trying to use his trickery to get past his player, which sometimes he can do, just make that simple pass and maybe get into the box so you can get on the end of a 1-2 from Townsend. Whatever it is, maybe he should have just been, you know, changed his sort of style of play a bit more. But like I said already, the fact that he still used his skill and trickery to cause problems for the Chelsea defence was obviously great to see. Maybe I do think he could have used it better, or even more better, if he had just been looking for a pass a little bit more than obviously trying to get past his players. Now obviously you can understand him being a frustrated figure at times, and that's mainly because he was isolated up top, and basically it's because Chelsea were putting pressure on us in the second half. It obviously meant we were unable to get players forward, so whenever he did get the ball, we'd clear it to Zaha, which was great. You know, most of our clearances to him were very accurate, but by the time you get it to Zaha, 3 or 4 Chelsea players have surrounded him, basically stopping where he can go, because they know that if you stop him, you stop our attacks. And obviously the fact that we weren't really supporting him with runners to give that extra pass, because it was just him on his own, he was quite isolated. Obviously that he sort of suffered from that lack of support. And like I've said already, on a number of occasions he was left isolated, and that's not to say that Townsend, you know, Townsend probably should have been up there alongside him, but because Townsend was coming back and doing defensive work, it meant that Zaha was just left out there. And rather than someone like Max Meyer when he was on the pitch, or even MacArthur going slightly further forward and just providing an extra man for Zaha to pass to, or someone just to drag the defence away so Zaha can get through, whatever it was, it would have been better just to see that in the game, because I do think he was quite isolated at times. And it does go for both Townsend and Zaha. I do think they were both quite isolated at times, but I think Zaha more so in the fact that he, for the majority of the game, was obviously our focal point overall. But like I said already, I do think a 6 is a fair reflection of his performance, and you know, when you consider he does what he normally does in terms of his skill and trickery, was of course great to see. It would just be nice to, you know, see him, even though he was a frustrated figure at times, it just would have been nicer for him just to pass a bit more in the game. And of course when he does, you know, gets chances to run at the defence, rather than just letting them crowd him out, try and just get past them and try and just, you know, get into the box. But overall I do think Zaha a 6 is a fair reflection of his performance. So I'm going to move on now to the subs. Obviously, Jordan Ayew came on for Max Meyer in the 70th minute, and obviously Jeffrey Slupp came on for MacArthur in the 80th minute. Now I'm going to give both these players 4s overall, mainly because they didn't really have that much influence on the game. But obviously, like I talked about a few weeks ago, in terms of Roy Hodgson, rather than being reactive, he should have been proactive and seen that the game weren't going that great. He should have made subs, but once again here he's reverted back to his old self. And obviously we could clearly see that Chelsea were beginning to get a bigger dominance in the game, so rather than bringing on a sub, you know, to be proactive, he was obviously reactive again and brought Jordan Ayew on after Chelsea's 3rd goal. ultimately, I understand that sub. You know, you bring on an attacking player to try and get you back into the game. But by that point, you should have really seen beforehand that you weren't really playing that well, and maybe brought him on for a little bit longer. You know, you've only given him, 20 minutes or so. Give him a little bit longer to make an impact. And, whilst he, chased and harried defenders, he had really little impact on the game. And, whether that's the fact that Chelsea were just better on us on the day, which they were, or whether it's just the fact that he wasn't really given enough time, considering the fact that rather than bringing him on after the goal, he should have been brought on before. Whatever it was, obviously it wasn't a bit disappointing, and obviously that's why I've given him the 4 overall. And obviously Jeffrey Slupp, who's brought on for the final 10 minutes or so, and when you consider we had someone like Sorloff or someone like Riedewald on the bench, it was quite disappointing to see Jeffrey Slupp come on, considering how terribly he performed midweek against Middlesbrough. Obviously that was a bit disappointing there, and like I said already, much like what I said with Jordan Ayew, I've given him a 4, mainly because even though Chelsea were in control of the game, he obviously had little impact there. Now I suppose the only sort of disappointing thing from this game is the fact that 2 of the goals, or the 2 of the second half goals, were basically so avoidable. You look back at the second goal we conceded, and if we don't give away the free kick in the first place, or we at least just defend properly as a back 4 and have someone on the far post, if the ball comes there, that first goal of the second half, so the second goal, if that was so avoidable, and obviously the other one as well, the third goal, Wan-Bissaka loses his man, lets Alonso put the ball into the box, and obviously Van Aanholt, rather than, tracking his man, he's obviously ball watching. So in that respect, both of them 2 goals were so avoidable. But actually, if you look at the game aside from the goals, I do think we held our own for large periods of the game. And like I said, I think we started the game brilliantly, and we really, really played well after half time. It's just the fact that a few lapses of concentration, a few bits where we sort of downed our sort of intensity of the game, that really punished us. But what you've got to look at it, I was coming into this game not really expecting anything, and Chelsea are a very good side, and of course you're going to have your moments where they overwhelm us, and they've got world class players on the pitch. But the fact that we played well for periods of the game was great. But when you consider we play that well, but then we're so silly in the fact that we give away silly mistakes, really disappoints me. And I suppose it's not just me, but I talk about, on behalf of the whole fan base, I'd rather us play bad and lose 3-1 to Chelsea, as opposed to us play good in large periods of the game, but then make silly mistakes and just give away the lead. Or not the lead, just, give Chelsea the lead so easily. But obviously you can understand Chelsea, the quality they've got, they're unbeaten at the start of the season. You can obviously understand that they're going to overwhelm us, and, they've got world-class players on the pitch, so we were expecting that before the game. But much like what I said with quite a lot of games this season, you look before the game, you'd expect to not get something from it, but then you come out of the game disappointing because your performance for periods of the game, once again, for periods of the game, because we were terrible in others, but that does really warrant it from the game. Now, the fact that we more than held our own is great to see, and you've got to remember that, yes, it's disappointing, but we're not one of these top teams. We're not going to match Chelsea for the whole game, and you can understand that. So you can feel, or we can obviously moan about us going away to Chelsea, yes, having a go, and we probably could have got a draw from this game. We scored a great goal, and then we were actually doing well for large periods of the game. But the thing that makes you a bit miserable is the fact that we made it a bit easy for Chelsea. And, like I said already, yes, we're not one of the top teams, but the fact that we matched Chelsea for for large periods of the game, then give it away, is the thing that's really miserable. And, when you consider, I'd rather us, like I've said, I'd rather us play badly against Chelsea and lose, as opposed to us play good in periods of the game, and it's silly mistakes that, make us lose. But my final point really for me is the fact that previous performances have warranted criticism. So, you look back at the last few months, or I suppose last month, look back at October. Performances during that month obviously warranted criticism because we were absolutely terrible there. But actually this performance here against Chelsea, other than the defensive mistakes, I don't really think we can criticise it. So my final really point of this section of the podcast is that even though previous performances have warranted criticism, I do think Sunday's game against Chelsea doesn't. So now I'm going to move on to my Man of the Match award, but before I do that and give you my Man of the Match, now I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now, as you probably heard at the end of the player ratings, in terms of our performance, it certainly was a game where we performed well in parts of the game, and obviously parts of the game where actually we were quite terrible. So in terms of the game overall, it was sort of, I wouldn't say it was a game of 2 halves, but it was a game of different periods, let's say, sort of the 20 minutes or so at the beginning. That was obviously, we were playing great. Sort of when we scored the goal, so the beginning of the first half, so beginning of the second half, we were great. But obviously there were other periods of the game, you know, you're looking at the end of the first half and obviously the end of the second half where we conceded them 2 other goals. You know, you're looking at that and going, actually, it wasn't necessarily a game of 2 halves, but it was a game of different periods where we were playing well in others and obviously not so great in others. But the 4 players I put on today's shortlist, you know, these players who throughout these good and bad periods of the game, you know, performed well and certainly do deserve you know, a bit of credit, you know, overall for their performance. Now, in terms of the 4 players, you know, I've gone with Wayne Hennessy, Cheku Kouyaté, Andros Townsend and Wilfried Zaha. And obviously, when you consider it was quite a disappointing result, it's actually quite difficult to pick players, but I do think these players did stand out for me. Now, in terms of Wayne Hennessy, I do think he made a number of great saves early on in the second half, whilst also, you know, not really being at fault for any of the 3 goals we conceded. So the fact that he made these great saves, you know, from Morata, from David Luiz, was of course great to see. And obviously the fact that he stopped Morata from scoring his hat-trick, albeit Morata was a bit stupid by trying to dink Hennessy when you consider he's like 6'6". Obviously that was a bit silly, but the fact that Hennessy was able to do a relatively good job defensively or in goal, considering his defensive front of him wasn't that great, is the reason he's on this shortlist. Obviously, Cheku Kouyaté, you know, done a job in the midfield. You know, his main priority against that Chelsea attack was to break up play, and I thought he'd done that relatively well. And actually, the fact that he looked to get forward, and albeit he may not have been the greatest going forward, and he was mainly primarily doing his defensive work, but the fact that he was looking to get that ball forward to the forwards whenever possible was, of course, great to see. So the fact that he done his great defensive duty in terms of being that solid physical presence in the middle of the park, breaking up play, and combine that with getting balls forward, that was of course great to see. Now, in terms of Andros Townsend, you know, obviously this guy, obviously I've talked quite a lot about the goal already, and the fact that that was a great quality equaliser. You know, I thought the build-up was great in terms of the 1-2s with MacArthur, and obviously that's all well and good, but I do think overall, aside from the goal, I do think Townsend's performance was really good. You know, I thought he caused loads of problems for the Chelsea defence, you know, playing in that forward role, drifting out to the left whilst also playing centrally. The fact that he linked up really, really well with the likes of Patrick Van Aanholt and Max Meyer, as well as causing problems for the Chelsea back four, that was of course great to see. And combine the fact that he was very good offensively with the fact that he scored the goal, and also combine it with the fact that he actually helped out defensively as well by tracking back and making an impact on the game by obviously helping out the team defensively. That was of course great to see. But like I've said already, you know, Andros Townsend, the main 3 points for me why he's on this man of the match shortlist is obviously the goal we scored. Great equaliser into that far post, that was obviously great. The fact that he just caused problems throughout the whole night for Chelsea, and of course the fact that he dropped deep and also helped his teammates out defensively was of course great to see. Now my final sort of person or player on the shortlist was quite a difficult one, because there were a few players I could have picked, you know, likes of Luka Milivojevic, even someone like Max Meyer I could have put in here, because I do think in the midfield, like I've said, as a collective I thought they played relatively well, but I'm going to give it to Wilfried Zaha, and that's mainly because, much like Townsend, I do think his skill and trickery caused lots of problems for the obviously Chelsea back four, and the fact that he was able to, you know, turn on his back on the defence and obviously attack them on quite a lot of occasions, whilst also, you know, running in between them like Townsend did, that was of course great to see. And like I've said, it was quite difficult to pick 4 players for the shortlist, mainly because it was quite a disappointing performance as a whole. But the fact that Zaha was able to use his skill and his trickery to actually get past players, albeit not always successfully, but the fact that he was able to get past them was of course great to see. But for me, I do think there's only one clear winner. You know, when you score the only goal, or you score your team's only goal in the game, with it being as good as it was, whilst also doing defensive and good offensive work as well, I do think there's only one clear winner. So Andros Townsend, congratulations. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was yet another solid performance from you. Now, of course, he was one of these players who was quite disappointed midweek, so quite a lot of pressure on him coming into this game to perform. And before the game, he was even talking about the fact that he needs to just improve his goal scoring abilities, try and score a few more goals for Palace. So the fact that he was talking about that before the game and had a disappointing performance midweek, and he still came out on Sunday and still performed like he did, was of course great to see. But like I've said, these 4 players obviously deserve credit. Hennessy for his saves, Kouyaté for his breaking up of the play, obviously Townsend for his goals and defensive and offensive work, and of course Zaha for his skills and trickery. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Andros Townsend, James Tonkins and Ray Lewington following the game.
Just one of those games today where the performance was better than maybe the scoreline suggested, or the game was closer.
Yeah, feels like a lot of games this season the performance has been better than the result deserved, but it's a tough one to take. We started well in both halves. Actually, we started well in the first half, and then I think we reacted well in the second half and got the goal, and I felt like we were on the front foot. Unfortunately, we switched off at a set piece, and then chasing the game against one of the best teams in the league is always difficult, and unfortunately they got the third.
You must have been pleased with your finish on that goal. It was a great assist from Maka too.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant from Maka. I made the run, he put me clean through on goal, and yeah, I managed to tuck it away. I'm happy with that. I think I said before in the week that more players need to chip in with goals other than Wilf, and hopefully I can build on that and then score a few more goals.
You played in the week against Middlesbrough, and then you're still sprinting right around at the end. How much extra work do you put in outside of training on your fitness?
I'm naturally fit anyway. The gaffer knows me well. He knows that I can play midweek and play in the week as well, in the weekend as well. So yeah, no, I was happy with the work rate I put in again today, and unfortunately it wasn't enough. We'll rest up, go again on Saturday, and hopefully we can get a better result.
It was unfortunate defeat today, but it certainly gave Chelsea a good game.
Yeah, I think maybe first half we gave them a bit too much respect, and without them having too many chances, they've gone in, 1-0 up, and from our point of view, it's a bit disappointed. The second half we come out sort of a different team. We had a good go for the first 20 minutes. Got our goal which we deserved, and then again sat back, which is going to happen in games, but they showed their quality in the end. But yeah, disappointing really.
I guess for the second goal, they kind of show what happens if you give them a bit of space, they will punish you.
Yeah, no, it's a world-class finish to be honest, but I think all round, we could have dealt with it better. Set plays, we take pride on them defensively, especially. So, obviously disappointed from that point of view. Yeah.
It was a great finish from Andros for our goal.
Yeah, no, it's a good assist from Maka as well. Played in. It was me, I think I put it into Andros, he set it back, and it was just quite a good move really, and we wanted to have more of that really in the game, but it didn't quite happen. We were playing at Stamford Bridge against one of the best teams in the league, so it's always going to be difficult, but we're looking at the goals, and all round we could have done better really.
Ray, can we just get your thoughts on the game today? It was a close game.
It was. I mean, like all of our games this year, they've been close. We were well in the game. In fact, when we went 1-1, we had probably a 20-minute spell in the game where we looked slightly superior. But you have to say we're playing against a quality side, and all aspects of the game from Chelsea were really good today. They closed us down. We had a really good, bright start, and then they come into it and they keep the ball so well, and they've got threats from all areas of the pitch. So it's a very difficult game, but I thought we coped well and we stuck with it. But obviously that second goal killed us.
And our equaliser came from, it was a great move, a really good assist from Maka, and then Andros Townsend playing up front, a really good finish.
Yeah, fantastic. He went through, kept his head. They're always far harder than they look, them ones, because he had a lot of time to think about it. But he kept his head down, kept the ball low, and beat the keeper. And as I say, after that, we were really in the game, and looked lively and looked like we might be able to add to it. But a free kick, which we felt at the time was a little bit harsh on us. We didn't deal with it, and they go 2-1 up, and you come away and you go 2-1 down. You're in for a hard match.
And Spurs up next week. How different a test will they be to Chelsea?
Different style of play, but listen, they're one of the top six. You've got to respect anyone in the Premier League top six. They're all high quality teams. Although they'll give us different problems, there'll still be problems. But we're encouraged by the way we're playing. Obviously, we need to turn some of our pressure into goals. We're not scoring enough goals, and but we'll go and attack them and take the game to them. But they are a quality side. We know that. It was a close game last year. Both games were close last year, so we know that if we're okay, we can give them a good game.
Roy, I've just spoken to Maurizio Sarri, and he said once Palace equalised, we were in trouble. But he had Eden Hazard on the bench, and that's a nice option to have.
Of course, but I mean, they're competing at the very, very top of the league. They're competing in Europe as well. So in actual fact, it would be surprising, I suppose, if they didn't have players of that quality to bring on. But I was very pleased with our start to the second half. I thought we were playing well. I thought we were more than evening the game out. But the second goal, unfortunately, from the free kick, put you on the back foot again. And you know, you're playing against a team that has got a lot of confidence. They do expect to win. And unfortunately, you know, we couldn't find within us the ability to get the equalising goal again. Although I must say, I thought we gave it a good go, and I thought there were even occasions at 3-1 where we were still trying to score the second goal. So I don't think I have any reason to be that dissatisfied with the team's performance, but one's always dissatisfied when the result doesn't go your way, even though we knew coming into the game today, if we're going to get something from this game, we'd have needed something a bit special, and unfortunately we weren't able to provide that.
I enjoyed your first half hour as well. I thought, you know, you were very solid and very well organised, very focused, but also you had a bit of teeth there. Wilf and Andros as a two looked threatening when they could.
Yeah, I think in the first 10 minutes we had 2 or 3 quite good chances, really. Maybe, you know, with the clinical finishing we saw from Chelsea, maybe had they created those chances, we could have found ourselves a goal down. But I thought our shape was good in the first half. I thought our organisation, the tactical awareness of the players. But of course, unfortunately, we did concede a goal, and to a team that's just won 10 on the trot or 10 unbeaten, then that means they go in at half-time quite happy, irrespective of how the game's actually panned out. But I thought the players, you know, really in the second half showed a lot more aggression at the start. So I thought our first 20 minutes of the second was much better. I thought that was, you know, a good performance, that. And duly got us an equaliser. But they scored 2 more, so we ended up losing the game. But I don't think we were disgraced in any way today.
No, I mean, I've seen a few of your games this season, Roy, and I always come away sort of thinking the same thing. There's been lots of positives in there, but you haven't quite got the result.
No, but it will come. We missed some chances before this run of games, and we always knew this run of games was going to ask a lot of questions of us, because, you know, when you play teams in the top 4 or 5 of the country, it's going to be difficult for you to get points, however well you're doing or whatever's happening. But I think that the season's got a lot of football left in it. There's many, many more games to play, and I'm fairly confident that with the players we have and the way we play and the performances that we've actually been given, then results will come, because if you continue to perform at the right level, the results have got to follow. They don't always necessarily follow in a particular period, because you can be dogged by a little bit of bad luck or things not quite going your way, but over 38 games it will.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Andros Townsend, James Tompkins and Ray Lewington had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Chelsea. But make sure to come back next week for my post-match review of the game against Tottenham. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace!